Hi everyone, welcome to the Communication and Conflict YouTube channel promoting mindful communication growth through conflict. This is also a podcast on anchor.fm under the name Chaos, CAOS. I'll put links in the information below for that. So today I want to talk about the many areas in which mediation is being used to support families where conflict is perhaps causing or has caused breakdown within the relationships within families, and obviously that can often have quite significant impacts on the welfare of children. Um, in the past, family mediation was mainly associated with the mediation or the type of mediation that's used when people go through divorce. But fortunately, nowadays, its application is much wider than just that context. And so I want to take you through some of the many ways and areas in which that is being used, and in some cases could be used more, but hasn't kind of taken off as much as it perhaps could do in the future. But there are some quite well established areas where mediation is being used to support families experiencing difficulty nowadays. So I want to particularly talk to you about those, but also look at some of the kind of less developed areas that either have started to happen or could develop as the understanding and awareness of mediation goes forward. So when I was first a director of a community mediation in West London, one of the things that people often used to want to train in mediation for was to work with families. But at the time, there were very few areas in which that could happen other than through divorce mediation. But as I say, I'm very glad to say that nowadays it's developed perhaps more thrivingly than in many, many other areas, and that's very pleasing to me because it's such a suitable process for supporting family relationship breakdown areas. So I'll go through a few examples. And hopefully it's of interest to you. I presume it is because you've clicked on the video. But if you haven't heard of some of these areas already, I hope that it will be a useful introduction to the ways in which mediation can be used with family breakdown. So the first one I'm going to look at is the use of mediation in homelessness and risk of homelessness family situations. So basically to support uh, uh, homelessness prevention, or sometimes if homelessness has already occurred, a young person perhaps has moved out of a family home due to difficult circumstances, then mediation can support the possibility of them not becoming so socially isolated, because it can help there to be a reconnection or a repair or an improvement in their relationships with their family, even if they still aren't living with their family. So in the early days of homelessness mediation, it was tended to be used and set up by councils, local councils, kind of with an agenda to try to get young people to move back home. But fortunately, as time's gone on, there's been a recognition that mediation can't really have that kind of agenda. But what it can do is simply support improved relationships between family members, particularly where someone has become homeless, and that may lead to them returning home. But as I said earlier, even if it doesn't lead to them returning home, it means that they still have strong connections with their family as a result of being able to talk through the difficulties that I presume in most cases mainly led to them leaving home. But obviously sometimes it may be that they were likely to do so anyway, just because young people often want their independence. But usually there will have been some kind of internal family difficulty, which could come from a wide range of challenges. It could be that two families have kind of blended, and then in the new home, so two people who've been divorced have come together and they've got their own children and they're living in the same house together, and sometimes that can cause problems just because of living in each other's space when they're not used to each other, they don't know each other so well. Sometimes it can be because there are intrinsic problems within the family, perhaps such as domestic violence or addiction or lack of money. Is obviously a very significant cause of young people becoming homeless, because perhaps the parents expect the child to go out and the young person to go out and earn some money, while perhaps their intention is to study. Perhaps they, expect some kind of contribution, but the young person doesn't feel able to. All sorts of reasons can lead to these kinds of stressful breakdowns in family contexts. There'll be many that I haven't mentioned in that list, but the main point being that the outcome is that the young person becomes homeless. And a mediation can be an immense support for those families in reconnecting in such a way that even if there's a breakdown and it's led to homelessness, there can be that support for reconnection. And as I say, sometimes it does lead to the young people moving back home. But even if not, it can help there to be a more kind of socially supported situation for those young people, and they don't feel like they've just got to stay away from their family because of the problems. But very frequently it does mean that the young person moves back home. So I particularly have worked with two or three organisations in the Midlands area of England, in the UK, and train different mediators for those organisations. And I'm going to give them special mention because they do a fantastic job in supporting young people and have a great sensitivity to the challenges that are faced by families experiencing this. So the first one is The Bridge in Charnwood in Leicestershire, who have a mediation project called Talk to Sort. So talk, then the number 2, and then sort. And I'll put a link to this as well in the video below. Another organisation I've worked with. So by working with, what I mean is I train the mediators, and sometimes give kind of consultancy support to them as well over some areas they may have concerns about. The other one is Wire Forest Night Stop, which is based in Kidderminster in the Midlands as well. And another one which is called Roundabout, and that's in Sheffield, in South Yorkshire, I think Sheffield is. So all three of those organisations work with young people who've become homeless or who are at risk of homelessness. And even though I speak about the young person being the one that is at risk of becoming homeless, obviously the issue is shared between the family and the young person. So it's also supporting the families themselves from whom the young person has moved out. So it's not kind of just working with the young person, it's working with the family as well to support both sides in restoring their broken family relationships. So they're the three projects that I particularly have worked with, and they, as I say, they do a fantastic job. And two of them at least I know work with young people in schools well before those young people are likely to become homeless. So even children as young as 11 years old, they go into schools and do the outreach work. And sometimes they do literally provide mediation between someone as young as 11 or 12 years old and the family members, because there are difficulties arising. And if you imagine how preventative that can be to the chances of those young people becoming homeless later, if they've managed to resolve difficulties that may be emerging as young as 11 or 12 years old within the family, then rather than that be a progressive kind of moving apart between the family, it's helping them to come together even at that early stage in conflict starting to emerge. So it's not just working with people on the cusp of homelessness, whether just before or just after they've left home, but also with children and their families much younger, at the ages of as young as 11 or 12 years old. So So those are the three main organisations that I'm aware of and have worked with that provide that kind of service. So that's Talk to Sort at the Bridge in Charnwood in Leicestershire. There's Wire Forest Night Stop and Mediation, and their project is called Time to Talk Mediation Service, and Roundabout based in South Yorkshire. And as I say, I'll put the links to those in the information below. So the next area that that is particularly one that I'm aware of, and again I've worked with some people who provide mediation in this kind of context, is organisations that provide family group conferencing. So family group conferencing, for those of you who don't know, and I don't do it myself, so this is my best explanation of it, but basically it's where if a young person is perhaps at risk of going into care, or is receiving some other kind of intervention support, family group conferencing is where the agencies involved in that decision and the carrying out of any such decisions, and the family members that have an involvement in that young person's life, come together in what's called a family group conference, and the aim is that they have a kind of a shared discussion about the best way of taking that situation forward. And I think usually the young person is also involved in the meeting, but I'm not sure that's always the case. But the point being about those kinds of meetings is that sometimes they're not able to be as successful as they could be because of difficulties that exist, possibly between family members that might be involved in that discussion. So there's a risk that the conference becomes as much of a kind of forum where those family members are falling out, rather than it be focused on the needs of the child. I think it's also possible that sometimes it provides mediation between agency workers and family members who might be at risk of having difficulties in the meeting as well. But the main point being that it's a kind of a pre-support option for people to work things out if they have difficulties with each other before they then participate in the wider family group conference about the young person. So it ensures that the focus is kept on the needs and the interests of the young person involved, rather than it become a kind of an argument session between usually family or other members, perhaps step family, carers, etc., of the young person. So it ensures the kind of the focus is where it should be, and it provides an opportunity for those people to kind of work things out before they attend the family group conference. So that's an area that I'm aware quite a few FGC agencies use mediation as that kind of supportive process, given that the kinds of things that might be being discussed in a family group conference can be quite contentious and challenging and stressful for people involved. So that's another area in which it's used. And I don't necessarily work directly with some organisations in that context, but I've had quite a few individuals who've come and trained with us from different bodies that provide that kind of support service, usually kind of subcontracted to a local authority child and family department. So that's another area in which mediation can be used to support family difficulties. Another area where mediation can be used is I kind of really like this one. Somebody or two people now actually have trained with us to learn mediation skills so that they can then provide it for parents of children who have special educational needs. So as you can probably imagine, or perhaps you know yourself, if you have a child with special educational needs, there can be additional stresses on the parents in such situations, perhaps beyond what parents of children who don't have such needs might experience. So these two people trained in mediation skills so that they could provide mediation support for the parents over the kind of challenging decisions that they might have to make together, and the additional kind of challenges of organising life, etc., around a child who has special educational needs. And I think perhaps understandably, statistically, it's more likely that parents with special educational needs will separate or divorce, perhaps because of those additional challenges. So the aims of the two people who trained with us was to be able to give them that kind of support option, to try to resolve those relationship challenges that arise through trying to parent children who have special educational needs. So I kind of loved it when they did want to train in mediation skills and were going to apply it in that in that way and for that purpose. So another one which I'm aware of people using mediation for is where this may not necessarily be involving young people, but where a family breakdown has occurred because someone has had an addiction. So where that's the case, it would probably not be the case that people would use mediation for this purpose while the person was still perhaps very much affected by their addiction. But once they've entered recovery and they've reached, I guess, a certain level of sobriety, from whether it's the drugs, alcohol, or other things, then there's the opportunity to try using mediation or to reconnect with a family that perhaps previously they'd broken away from, broken away from each other because of the impact of the addiction on the family and on the relationships between people, etc. So obviously it requires quite a lot of trust for that reconnection to go ahead, because obviously it will often have been a very difficult period while the separation from the person would have occurred, because so having occurred, then for there to be trust about the reconnection, the reintegration together, needs a lot of trust and safety about the possibilities of that happening. But the point being that mediation is there as an option for people to try to re-establish those family relationships, so that there's a chance for that person to move back to having that kind of family support and family connection, which they will have lost through the consequences of their actions when in kind of full addiction over the situation, when addicted. So that's also a fantastic area in which mediation can be used to support that reconnection between families. And so it's not something that people who've trained with me have actually done, but I do know that it does occur. So that's another area where that's possible. Now this next area I'm going to talk about is as much conflict coaching as it is mediation, but it's where families are caring for a family member who have a serious illness, or perhaps is terminally ill, and that it's not an immediate passing away, that there's a kind of a long drawn out kind of difficulty, but expected to lead to dying. And the challenges that families face going through that kind of period. So as I say, whether it is because of a terminal illness or whether there's just an ongoing need for there to be a carer within a family, obviously challenges in those kinds of situations is that family members can often have very different views about how the person should be cared for, even if they're not the person actually providing the care. And so obviously that can lead to family conflicts and difficulties. And again, quite often if there isn't some kind of support, it can lead to breakdown in the family. It can lead to people kind of not seeing each other, not visiting. If they do visit, sometimes it leads to a kind of a row, and a lot of stress all round. And obviously the challenges arising simply because everybody wants to care for this person, but maybe there are different views about how that should happen. And so mediation and conflict coaching, I'm aware of, are provided in that context. Certainly someone I know who provides conflict coaching for carers, with regard to the challenges they face in being a carer, and perhaps the difficulties they have with the person they care for, but also perhaps with the family members who have their own views about how that should go about, should happen. But obviously, also there can be mediation between people involved in those situations, so that they can kind of sit down and have a supported discussion about how they want to more kind of cooperatively support each other in caring for that particular family member. So that's another area in which mediation can be very useful in supporting family relationships that have either already broken down in some way or are at risk of it, and people are looking for support in preventing that from happening. And just a couple more areas, although hopefully you can see by the ones that I've talked about, really there are so many areas in which mediation can be supportive within family difficulties. But the two more that I'm specifically going to refer to that I've been involved in myself, and which I'm aware that other people are involved in, are just simple family breakdown, family difficulty, or difficulties between particular members of a family. So it could be between two siblings within a family. It could be, that they haven't spoken to each other a lot over the last 10 years because of some kind of falling out previously. It might be post a parent passing away, and or difficulties that arose around the time of the parent passing and them not speaking to each other since. It can be just about respective family difficulties, maybe between the two older siblings, so they've got their own families, and maybe some difficulties have arisen between the two families, or as a consequence of being part of their separate families. All sorts of reasons, obviously, just why two siblings might have fallen out, or it might be between a parent and an adult child, and that people want mediation in that context. Maybe something happened about. I could give reasons, but I think anybody listening will know the kinds of things that can lead to family member relationship breakdowns, whether young people are involved or whether it's by the time people have all become adults, the children have become adults. So that's another area where people use mediation to resolve those difficulties. And another one which seems to be becoming more prevalent, to be honest, and in a way I can understand why, is once parents have separated through the divorce process, there are often challenges in establishing and maintaining a parenting relationship of children of the couple who have now divorced. And it kind of saddens me that isn't what occurs as a result of mediation through the divorce process, because it tends to, or perhaps has to, deal with simply the legal issues of the finances, the asset distribution, and unfortunately what it often leads to is a very kind of mechanical parenting plan that is kind of never likely to work, really, because it's so specified and kind of regular that it doesn't acknowledge the irregular and constantly varying needs that parents have, or that children have, and that therefore kind of pass on to the parents in being able to parent them. So you get these suggestions where children see a parent maybe 3 days a week and the other one 4 days a week, or perhaps they see their one parent every other weekend, and the rest of the time it's with a different parent. But the point is, life isn't that regular, and so when it's specified that kind of specifically in some of the orders that come out of the divorce process, it's almost never likely to work. And so as a consequence, a lot of parents look to having some kind of support beyond their divorce in being able to kind of deal with each other. And obviously, their views will often be that it's the other one who's causing the problem, and obviously vice versa, and therefore it becomes very entrenched and very stuck. And so an area of mediation that seems to be becoming more and more requested is for supporting parents in being able to develop a post-separation parenting relationship is usually how I describe it, because that's very much what it's about. It's they're not in an intimate relationship anymore, but they are still parents, so they need to be able to relate effectively with each other in the interests of parenting their child or children as well as possible. Um, and sometimes that is almost completely broken down, and very often that's broken down as a result of the court process they've been through. Um, and so parents looking for that kind of support is something which is very much starting to happen. And even though I kind of would prefer that mediation within the court process provided this, it clearly doesn't. Um, and so it's an area which it's great for people to have the option of having that kind of support to help them to uh, acknowledge that they are still parents, and that there are um, challenges that they faced in being parents to their children, but sometimes that those challenges become very personalized and polarized, rather than keep the focus on the needs of the child. And the parents as well, actually, but the needs of the parents in terms of their welfare, rather than winning a battle with the other parent. So that's kind of the last one that I'm going to list. But obviously, as I say, I'm sure just through thinking through the examples I've given, you can perhaps imagine various other areas in which mediation can be supportive of family and child um, um, relationship challenges that can arise. So I hope you found it interesting. I hope you found it useful. Those are the ones that I'm definitely aware of or are directly involved in myself. If you've got ideas yourself or examples that you're aware of yourself to share, please put them in the comments section or get in touch with me to do so. If you like this video, please click the like button. If you think other people might be interested in it, please share it with them. Please also subscribe to the channel if you'd like to get future videos and or podcasts about this kind of topic. And thanks very much for listening and watching if you're on YouTube. Have a good day. Bye bye.